For viewers across Africa and the rest of the world, this is NC Continental Prime. I am Benga Aboroa. The beginning in West Africa, where Nigerians will be looking forward to an end to long queues and scarcity of available cash as the nation's Supreme Court rules against the implementation of a currency redesign policy that has sparked protests across the country. The court, in a landmark ruling, described the implementation of the policy as undemocratic and accused the central bank of breaching its own act. News Central's Amadine Uyi reports.
The case had turned out to be the most controversial case before Nigeria's judiciary since the commencement of the year. 16 Nigerian states had challenged the Apex Bank's redesign policy, which saw the redesign of the nation's 200, 500, and 1,000 naira notes, saying it brought untold hardship to citizens and its implementation process illegal. Though the nation's Apex Bank had called their bluff to review the policy, citing reasons for its implementation, Nigerians continued to form long queues at ATM terminals, which sparked nationwide protests across the country.
This policy, which was designed and targeted at a political party and its candidates, has brought untold hardship on our people.
The Apex Court ruled suspending the implementation of the policy to December the 31st, calling its implementation draconian and undemocratic.
The Supreme Court of Nigeria has given us all the reliefs that we sought for by a very unanimous judgment. The full court of 7 justices gave a unanimous judgment, 7-0, that all our prayers to the court have been accepted.
This particular decision today has laid a solid foundation for our incoming president, the president-elect, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, to start and cruise on a solid foundation. This particular decision today has proven that Nigerian law is a respecter of no one.
The Supreme Court emphatically stated that the process for the implementation of the Naira redesign policy was not properly carried out. It says the Central Bank of Nigeria contravenes Section 20 of its own act, while the Apex Court insisted that banks do not have a right to withhold depositors' funds. Those against the policy say it's a victory for democracy.
Many people have been challenging us that because we have huge amount of money that we put in our houses, that's why we come to court. But you know it is not true, because like myself, I challenge EFCC that they should go to any of my property and boggle it and take any money that they have seen in my houses. Therefore, it's not about me or about Erufai or about Bello. It is about the Nigerians.
As counsel to the plaintiffs and beneficiary of this judgment, we shall take steps within the confines of the law to ensure that whoever that is in contempt of court or does not comply with the Supreme Court decision is brought to book.
The Supreme Court has spoken. We cannot sit in judgment over the Supreme Court. I expect the CBN to comply. I expect the President to comply. We are a nation under law. The Supreme Court has spoken, and we are bound.
With the policy now outrightly dismissed and declared illegal by Nigeria's Apex Court, citizens will be hoping they can return back to their normal lives. Amadine Uyi, reporting for News Central.
Now, join us to discuss this further. We're joined by Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO of Asia Dynamic Solutions. One welcome to you. Good evening to you, Mukhtar.
Thank you. Good evening.
Now, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of the state governors that the old 200 naira, 500 naira and 1,000 naira notes remain legal tender till December 31st, 2023. What do you make of this judgment?
Well, it's a good judgment. Like the lawyer said, we need to obey the Supreme Court. But we must know that that judgment was actually given to the federal government and the state government. Now it's not left for the state government to order the CBN that was not party to that to respect what the Supreme Court have just said. So we are waiting. Whether it will reduce the suffering of Nigerians, I'm yet to see that from where I'm sitting. Because if you talk to the banks, they will tell you that they don't want to have the old 1,000 naira or 500 naira notes in their vaults. And the CBN will well tell you also that they have destroyed some of those notes. But we'll wait to see how it goes. Will they be printing the old notes and the new note together, or do we have to go to get the old notes? And how visible is that? And so for me, it's a wait and see game now.
Now, Mukhtar, some have argued that the ruling by the Supreme Court violates the statutory role of the CBN. How valid is this argument?
Very valid. Like I said, if you look at that, the judgment, there was no mention of the CBN. It was a judgment between the federal government and the state government, not the CBN. And if you look at monetary policy, this is a monetary policy, and it's a monetary policy tool. So one of those monetary policy tools has to also do with currency redesigning, issuing of currency, coming up with monetary policy decision. So the precedent that the Supreme Court is setting now is maybe one day somebody can also challenge the decision of the MPC for fixing interest rate and go to the Supreme Court and get a judgment. So it's independent, it's a monetary policy decision. So I think, well, I'm not a lawyer. We may begin to hear the federal government talk about the technicality of the judgment. And if you listen to Malam Nasiru El-Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State, he said we'll go behind closed door and discuss on way forward. So definitely what we might be seeing, we might be also be looking for a political solution to these issues. And that has always been what we have always said, that this decision is more of a political decision rather than an economic decision.
Now, still talking about political decision rather than an economic decision. Some have looked at the timing of this judgment coming after the presidential elections. Does it give credence to those who say that, you know, this was more political than economic?
Justice delays, justice denied. The Supreme Court have dragged their foot up to this moment. Nigerians were no more excited to hear what the Supreme Court has to say. If you follow, most Nigerians were not even following the decision of the Supreme Court because they are dealing with other issues that have to do with the elections, the processes that led to the election of the new president. Nigerians are not happy about it. There was a lot of irregularity, and that's what Nigeria is dealing with. And the Supreme Court cannot come in and give a judgment and take us out of that space as it stands now. So for me, I believe it's more of a political decision. If they have taken the decision 2 or 3 weeks ago before the presidential election, rather they kept on postponing it, saying we should maintain the status quo. And so now they've come with this decision. And you can see that we are not hearing the noise from the ruling party, like what they were saying those days that, oh, this decision must be followed by the federal government. We've not heard any of them say anything. So that also buttress the fact that it was more of a political decision than an economic decision, especially with the governors. And for the man that has always been in the forefront of this is the governor of Kaduna State. For him to now say after the judgment that we'll look how we can resolve this behind closed doors, that tells you that
exactly
what they fear most was that this decision was going to stop them from winning the election. Since that victory has already been gotten, they now feel more better to discuss with Mr. President. Remember that Mr. President had reached out to them even before the election to have an out-of-court settlement as regards these policies.
Now, Mukhtar, with what has happened with the Nigerian economy since the initial action by the Central Bank of Nigeria, how much succor will this bring to long-suffering Nigerians and also the Nigerian economy?
Well, for the long-suffering Nigeria, I don't know how much succor it could be. Like I said, that also depends. We've not had any circular from CBN. We need to know whether those monies that have been moved from the banks to the CBN are still there. How will the CBN use this? I remember that one of the monetary tools that they use to guide against inflation, which has become a monster globally, is a reduction in liquidity in the system. How will this now affect inflationary figure going forward? Well, for businesses, it has not been the best of business, especially businesses in the informal sector. They have suffered so much during this period. And so we'll see that begin to play out in the GDP. A lot of Nigerians have not been able to transact business. Most of the companies have been shut down because of this policy. Even though we believe that the policy is the right policy, but implementation has not been what anybody desire. So definitely economically, it may have an impact. Remember that since this policy came into being, we've seen the stability of the exchange rate in the parallel market. So now will we see that if this policy coming out now, will we begin to see those jump in exchange rate between the Naira and the dollar? And not to forget that we were made to understand by the CBN that after this policy came, over 80% of the money that were outside the banking space found their way into the banking space. Now, with this decision, the other 500 billion that the CBN was expecting to come back to the banking space, they are in the hands of politicians. So are we saying that those politicians will not be the one that will have the old note to be spending, and we have the governorship election in a week time? So definitely, the sun have thrown a lot of things into the works of the CBN, and also may have an adverse effect on the economy going forward.
Definitely indeed. But before I let you go, Mukhtar, we're yet to hear a response from to the ruling from the federal government. What kind of reaction would you expect? And I mean, I shouldn't even be asking this question if they would obey the court order, but because of what we've seen in the past and precedent. So are you expecting the federal government to, adhere by this judgment by the Supreme Court? And what sort of response are you expecting?
Actually, I expected the federal government to have come up with a decision by now, but they will tell you that they are studying it. The APC, as a party, has come out and said the CBN governor and the Attorney General of the Federation, the Minister of Justice, should resign. So I see that laughable also, because they all belong to the same party. They said they misled the president. If you are going by the antecedent, if you listen to the Attorney General, Minister of Justice, he has said that the Supreme Court have erred, that the presidency have not disobeyed the Supreme Court in any way. And also when you listen to the Minister for Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, also said that the president have not disobeyed the Supreme Court ruling in any way. So if you look at that by and by today ruling, like I said, the party to this ruling is the CBN. I mean, the party to this ruling is the federal government and the state government. And so the state government expects the federal government to talk to the CBN to reverse the policy. But like you said in the opening of this, the monetary policy is different. The CBN Act is different. So we need to watch this space, and I don't expect them to come out clearly and say we abide by it. If they do that, that would be nice. But from where I'm sitting, from the antecedent of this current administration, I don't think so.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO of Asia Holdings. Thank you very much for joining us on the news.
My pleasure.